welcome to StudySavvy. In today's reading podcast, we'll be studying Class 12 Biology, Organisms and Populations, NCERT, line by line. This chapter helps us to understand how living organisms interact with the environment, how populations grow, and how factors like climate and resources and adaptations influence survival. So take a moment to relax, focus your attention, and let's begin this calm and clear reading of organisms and populations. Our living world is fascinatingly diverse and amazingly complex. We can try to understand its complexity by investigating processes at various levels of biological organizations, macromolecules, cells, tissues, organs, individual organisms, populations, communities, ecosystem, and biomes. At any level of biological organization, we can ask two types of questions. For example, when we hear bulbul singing early in the morning in the garden, we may ask, how does the bird sing? Why does the bird sing? The how type questions seek the mechanism behind the process, while the why type questions seek the significance of the process. For the first question in our example, the answer might be in terms of operation of the voice box and vibrating bone in the bird. Whereas for the second question, the answer may lie in the bird's need to communicate with its mate during the breeding season. When you observe nature around you with a scientific frame of mind, you will certainly come up with many interesting questions of both types. Why are night blooming flowers generally white? How does the bee know which flower has nectar? Why does cactus have so many thorns? How does the chick sparrow recognize her own mother? And so on. You have already learned in previous classes that ecology is a subject which studies the interaction among organisms and between the organism and its physical or biotic environment. Ecologically is basically concerned with four levels of biological organizations: organisms, population, communities, and biomes. In this chapter, we will explore ecology at population levels. Populations attribute. In nature, we rarely find isolated single individuals of any species. Majority of them live in groups in a well-defined geographical area, share or compete for similar resources, potentially interbreed, and thus constitute a population. Although the term interbreeding implies sexual reproduction, a group of individuals resulting from even asexual reproduction is also generally considered a population for the purpose of ecological studies. All cormorants in a wetland, rats in a abandoned dwelling, teak wood trees in a forest track, bacteria in a cultured plate, and lotus plant in a pond are some examples of populations. In earlier chapters, you have learned that although an individual organism is the one that has to cope with a changed environment, it is at the population level that the natural selection operates to evolve the desired traits. Population ecology is therefore an important area because it links ecology to population genetics and evolution. A population has certain attributes, whereas an individual organism does not. An individual may have births and deaths, but a population has birth rates and death rates. In a population, these rates refer to per capita births and deaths. The rates hence expressed are changed in numbers, increase or decrease with respect to members of the population. Here is an example. In a pond there were 20 lotus plants last year, and through reproduction 8 new plants are added, taking the current population to 28. We calculate the birth rate as 8 by 20 equal to 0.4 offsprings per lotus birth year per year. If 4 individuals in a laboratory population of 40 fruit flies died during a specific time interval, say a week, the death rate in the population during that period is 4 by 40 equals to 0.1 individuals per fruit fly per week. Another attribute characteristic of a population is sex ratio. An individual is either a male or a female, but a population has sex ratio. For example, 60% of the populations are female and 40% are males. A population at any given time is composed of individuals of different ages. If the age distribution percent individuals of a given age or age group is plotted for the population, the resulting structure is called an age pyramid. For human population, the age pyramid generally shows age distribution of males and females in a diagram. The shape of a pyramid reflects the growth status of the population: A, whether it is growing, B, stable, or C, declining. The size of the population tells us a lot about its status in the habitat. Whatever ecological processes we wish to investigate in a population, be it the outcome of competition with another species, the impact of a predator, or the effect of a pesticide application, we always evaluate them in the terms of any change in population size. The size in nature could be as low as below 10 Siberian cranes at Bharatpur wetlands in any year, or go into millions. Clamintonos in a pond. Population size, technically called population density, designated as n, need not necessarily be measured in numbers only. Although the total number is generally the most appropriate measure of population density, it is in some cases either meaningless or difficult to determine. In an area, if there are 200 carrot grass, Parthenium hysterophorus, plants but only a single huge banyan tree with a large canopy, stating that the population density of banyan is low relative to that of carrot grass amounts to underestimating the enormous role of that banyan in that community. In such cases, the percent cover or biomass is a more meaningful measure of the population size. Total number is again not an easily adoptable measure if the population is huge and counting is impossible or very time consuming. If you have a dense laboratory culture of bacteria in a petri dish, what is the best measure to report its density? Sometimes for certain ecological investigation, there is no need to know the absolute population densities. Relative densities serve the purpose equally well. For instances, the number of fish caught per trap is good enough measure of its total population density in the lake. We are mostly obliged to estimate population sizes indirectly without actually counting them or seeing them. The tiger census in our national parks and tiger reserves is often based on pug marks and fecal pellets. Population growth. The size of a population for any species is not a static parameter. It keeps changing with time, depending on various factors including food availability, predation pressure, and adverse weather. In fact, it is these changes in population density that gives us some idea of what is happening to the population, whether it is flourishing or declining. Whatever might be the ultimate reason, the density of a population in a given habitat during a given period fluctuates due to the changes in four basic processes, two of which, natality and immigration, contribute an increase to the population density, and to mortality and immigration to a decrease. Natality refers to the number of births given during a given period in the population that are added to the initial density. Mortality is the number of deaths in a population during a given period. Immigration is the number of individuals of same species that have come into the habitat from elsewhere during the time period under consideration. Immigration is the number of individuals of a population who left the habitat and gone elsewhere during the time period under consideration. So if n is the population density at time t, then its density at time t plus 1 is n t plus 1 equals to nt plus b plus I minus d plus e. You can see from the above equation that the population density will increase if the number of births plus the number of immigrants b plus I is more than the number of deaths plus number of immigrants d plus e. Under normal conditions, births and deaths are the two most important factors influencing population density. The other two factors assuming importance under only special conditions. For instance, if a new habitat is just being colonized, immigration may contribute more significantly to a population growth than birth rates. Growth models. Does the growth of a population with time show any specific unpredictable pattern? We have been concerned about unbridled human population growth and problems created by it in our country, and it is therefore natural for us to be curious if different animal populations in nature behave the same way or show some restraints on growth. Perhaps we can learn a lesson or two from the nature on how to control population growth. First is exponential growth. Resource food and space availability is obviously essential for the unimpeded growth of a population. Ideally, when the resources in a habitat are unlimited, each species has the ability to realize fully its innate potential to grow in number, as Darwin observed while developing his theory of natural selection. Then the population grows. Ideally, when resources in the habitat are unlimited, each species has the ability to release fully its innate potential to grow in number, as Darwin observed while developing his theory of natural selection. Then the population grows in an exponential or geometric fashion. If in a population of size n, the birth rates, not the total number per capita beds, are represented as B, and death rates, again per capita death rates are as D, then the increase or decrease in N during a unit time period T, dN by dt will be equal to B minus D into N. Let B minus D be equal to R, then dN by dt is equal to R into N. Then the R in this equation is called the intrinsic rate of natural increase, and it is a very important parameter chosen for assessing impacts of any biotic or abiotic factor on population growth. To give you some idea about the magnitude of R values, for the Norway rat it is R is equal to 0.05, and for flowered beetle it is 0.12. In 1981, the R value for human population in India was 0.0205. Find out what the current R value is. For calculating it, you need to know the birth rates and death rates. The above equation describes the exponential or geometric growth pattern of a population, figure 11.3, and the results in a J-shaped curve when we plot n in relation to time. If you're familiar with the basic calculus, you can derive the integral form of the exponential growth equation as nt equals to n naught e to the power rt, where nt is equal to population density after time t, n naught is equal to population density at time 0, r is equal to intrinsic rate of natural increase, e is the base of natural logarithms, 2.71828. Any species growing exponentially under unlimited resources condition can reach enormous population densities in a short time. Darwin showed how even a slow-growing animal like elephant could reach enormous numbers in the absence of checks. The following is an anecdote popularly narrated to demonstrate dramatically how a faster population could be built up when growing exponentially. The king and the minister sat for a chess game. The king, confident of winning the game, was ready to accept any bet proposed by the minister. The minister humbly said that if he won, he wanted only some wheat grains, the quantity of which is to be calculated by placing on the chessboard one grain in square 1, then 2 in 2, and then 4 in square 3, and 8 in square 4, and so on, doubling each time the previous quantity of wheat on the next square until all 64 squares were filled. The king accepted seemingly the silly bet and started the game, but unlucky for him, the minister won. The king felt that fulfilling minister's bet was so easy, he started with a single grain on the first square and proceeded to fill the other squares following minister's suggested procedure. But by the time he had covered half the chessboard, the king realized to his dismay that all the wheat produced in his entire kingdom pooled together would still be inadequate to cover all the 64 squares. Now, think of a paramecium starting with just one individual and through a binary fission doubling in numbers every day, and imagine what a mind-boggling population size it would reach in 64 days, provided food and space remain unlimited. Now, logistic growth. No population of any species has at its disposal unlimited resources to permit exponential growth. This leads to competition between individuals for limited resources. Eventually, the fittest individual will survive and reproduce. The governments of many countries have also realized this fact and introduced various restraints with a view to limit human population growth. In nature, a given habitat has enough resources to support a maximum possible number, beyond which no further growth is possible. Let us call this limit as nature's carrying capacity for the species in that habitat. A population growing in a habitat with limited resources show initially a lag phase, followed by phases of acceleration and deacceleration, and finally an asymptote when the population density reaches the carrying capacity. A plot of n in relation to time t results in a sigmoid curve. This type of population growth is called world per logistic growth and is described by the following equation: dn by dt is equal to rn kn divided by k, where n is equal to population density at time t, r is equal to intrinsic rate of natural increase, k is carrying capacity. Since the resources for growth for most animal populations are finite and becoming limited sooner or later, the logistic growth model is considered a more realistic one. Gather from the government census data the population figures for India for the last 100 years and plot them and check which growth pattern is evident. Life history variations. Population evolved to maximize their reproductive fitness, also called Darwinian fitness, high R value, in the habitat in which they live. Under particular set of selection pressures, organisms evolved towards the most efficient reproductive strategy. Some organisms breed only once in their lifetime. Pacific salmon fish, bamboo, while the others breed many times during their lifetime, most birds and mammals. Some produce a large number of small-sized offsprings, oysters, pelagic fishes, while others produce a small number of large-sized offspring, birds, mammals. So, which is desirable for maximizing fitness? Ecologists suggest that life history traits of organisms have evolved in relation to the constraints imposed by the biotic and abiotic components of the habitat in which they live. Evolution of life history traits in different species is currently an important area of research being conducted by ecologists. Population interactions. Can you think of any natural habitat on Earth that is inhabited just by a single species? There's no such habitat, and such a situation is inconceivable. For any species, the minimal requirement is one more species on which it can feed. Even a plant species which makes its own food cannot survive alone. It needs the soil microbes to break down the organic matter in soil and return the inorganic nutrients for absorption. And then how will a plant manage pollination without an animal agent? It is obvious that in nature, animals, plants, and microbes do not and cannot live in isolation but interact in various ways to form a biological community. Even in animal communities, many interactive linkages exist, although all may not be readily apparent. Interspecific interactions arise from the interaction of populations of two different species. They could be beneficial, detrimental, or a neutral, neither harmful nor benefit, to one of the species or both, assigning a plus sign for the beneficial interaction, minus sign for the detrimental, and 0 for neutral interaction. Let us look at the possible outcomes of interspecific interactions. Both species benefit in mutualisms and both lose in competition in their interactions with each other. In both parasitism and predations, only one species benefit, parasite and the predator respectively, and the interaction is detrimental to the other species, host and prey respectively. The interaction where one species is benefited and the other is neither benefited nor harmed is called commensalism. In amensalism, on the other hand, one species is harmed whereas the other species is unaffected. Predation, parasitism, and commensalism share a common characteristic. The interacting species live close together. Predation. What would happen to all the energy fixed by autotrophic organisms if the community has no animals to eat plants? You can think of predation as nature's way of transferring to higher trophic levels the energy fixed by plants. When we think of predator and prey, most probably it is the tiger and the deer that has readily come to our mind. But a sparrow eating any seed is no less a predator. Although animals eating plants are categorized separately as herbivores, they are, in a broad ecological context, not very different from predators. Besides acting as conduits for energy transfer across trophic levels, predators play other important roles. They keep prey populations under control, but for predators, prey species could achieve very high population densities and cause ecosystem instability. When certain exotic species are introduced into a geographical area, they become invasive and start spreading fast because the invaded land does not have its natural predators. The prickly pear cactus introduced into Australia in the early 1920s caused havoc by spreading rapidly into millions of acres of rangeland. Finally, the invasive cactus was brought under control only after cactus feeding predator, a moth, from its natural habitat was introduced into the country. Biological control methods adopted in agriculture pest control are based on the ability of the predator to regulate prey population. Predators also help in maintaining species diversity in a community by reducing the intensity of competition among competing prey species. In the rocky interstitial communities of American Pacific coast, the starfish pisaster is an important predator. In a field experiment, when all the starfish were removed from an enclosed interstitial area, more than 10 species of invertebrates became extinct within a year because of interspecific competition. If a predator is too efficient and overexploits its prey, then the prey might become extinct, and following it, the predator will also become extinct for the lack of food. This is the reason why predators in nature are prudent. Prey species have evolved various defenses to lessen the impact of predation. Some species of insects and frogs are cryptically colored, camouflaged to avoid being detected easily by the predator. Some are poisonous and therefore avoided by predators. The monarch butterfly is highly distasteful to its predator bird because of a special chemical present in its body. Interestingly, the butterfly acquires this chemical during the caterpillar stage by feeding on a poisonous weed. For plants, Herbivores are the predators. Nearly 25% of all insects are known to be phytophagous, feeding on plant sap and other parts of the plant. The problem is particularly severe for plants because, unlike animals, they cannot run away from the predators. Plants therefore have evolved an astonishing variety of morphological and chemical defenses against herbivores. Thorns, Cassia, cactus are the most common morphological means of defense. Many plants produce and store chemicals that make herbivores sick when they are eaten, inhibit feeding or digestion, disrupt its reproduction, or even kill it. You must have seen the weed calotropis growing in an abandoned field. The plant produces highly poisonous cardiac glycosides, and that is why you never see any cattle or goat browsing on this plant. A wide variety of chemical substances that we extract from plants on a commercial scale, for example, nicotine, caffeine, quinine, strychnine, opium, etc., are produced by them actually as defenses against grazers and browsers. Second, competition. When Darwin spoke of struggle for existence and survival of the fittest in nature, he was convinced that interspecific competition is a potent force in organic evolution. It is generally believed that competition occurs when closely related species compete for the same resources that are limiting. But this is not entirely true. Firstly, totally unrelated species could also compete for the same source. For instance, in some shallow South American lakes, visiting flamingos and resident fish lakes compete for their common food, the zooplankton in the lake. Secondly, the resources need not be limiting for competition to occur in interference competition. The feeding efficiency of one species might be reduced due to the interfering and inhibitory presence of the other species, even if resources, food and space are abundant. Therefore, competition is best defined as a process in which the fitness of one species, measured in the terms of R, the intrinsic rate of increase, is significantly lower in the presence of another species. It is relatively easy to demonstrate in laboratory experiments, as Gauss and other experiment ecologists did. When resources are limited, this competitively superior species will eventually eliminate the other species, but evidence for such competitive exclusions occurring in nature is not always conclusive. Strong and persuasive circumstantial evidence does exist, however, in some cases. The Abington tortoise in Galapagos Islands became extinct within a decade after goats were introduced on the island, apparently due to the greater browsing efficiency of goats. Another evidence for the occurrence of competition in nature comes from what is called competitive release. A species whose distribution is restricted to a small geographical area because of the presence of a competitively superior species is found to expand its distributional range dramatically when the competing species is experimentally removed. Cornell's elegant field experiments showed that on a rocky sea coast of Scotland, the larger and competitively superior barnacle, Blanus, dominates the interstitial area and excludes the smaller barnacle Chathamalis from that zone. In general, herbivores and plants appear to be more adversely affected by competition than carnivores. Gauss's competitive exclusion principle states that two closely related species competing for the same resources cannot coexist indefinitely, and the competitively inferior one will be eliminated eventually. This may be true if resources are limited, but not otherwise. More recent studies do not support such gross generalization about competition. While they do not rule out the occurrence of interspecific competition in nature, they point out that species facing competition might evolve mechanisms that promote coexistence rather than exclusion. One such mechanism is resource partitioning. If two species compete for the same resource, they could avoid competition by choosing, for instance, different times for feeding or different foraging patterns. MacArthur showed 5 closely related species of warbles living on the same tree were able to avoid competition and coexist due to behavioral differences in their foraging activities. Parasitism. Considering that the parasitic mode of life ensures free lodging and meals, it is not surprising that parasitism has evolved in so many taxonomic groups from plants to higher vertebrates. Many parasites have evolved to be host specific. They can parasite only a single species of host in such a way that both host and parasite tend to co-evolve. That is, if the host evolves special mechanism for rejecting or resisting the parasite has to evolve mechanism to counteract and neutralize them in order to be successful with the same host species. In accordance with their lifestyles, parasites evolve special adaptations such as loss of unnecessary sense organs, presence of adhesive organs, or suckers to cling onto the host, loss of digestive system, and high reproductive capacity. The life cycles of parasites are often complex, involving one or two intermediate hosts or vectors to facilitate parasitization of its primary host. The human liver fluke, a trematode parasite, depends on two intermediate hosts, a snail and a fish, to complete its life cycle. The malaria parasite requires a vector, mosquito, to spread to other hosts. Majority of the parasites harm the host. They may reduce the survival, growth, and reproduction of the host and reduce its population density. They might render the most vulnerable to predation by making it physically weak. Do you believe that an ideal parasite should be able to thrive within the host without harming it? Then why didn't the natural selection lead to the evolution of such totally harmless parasites? Parasites that feed on the external surface of most host organisms are called ectoparasites. The most familiar type of this group are lice on humans, ticks on dogs. Many marine fishes are infested with ectoparasitic copepods. Cuscuta, a parasitic plant that is commonly found growing on hedge plants, has lost its chlorophyll and leaves in the course of evolution. It derives its nutrition from the host plant which parasites it. The female mosquito is not considered a parasite, although it needs our blood for reproduction. Can you explain why? The reason is because it does not take shelter in our body. In contrast, endoparasites are those that live inside the host body at different sites: liver, kidney, lungs, red blood cells, etc. The life of endoparasites are more complex because of their extreme specialization. Their morphological and anatomical features are greatly simplified while emphasizing their reproductive potential. Brood parasitism in birds is a fascinating example of parasitism in which the parasitic bird lays its egg in the nest of its host and lets the host incubate them. During the course of evolution, the eggs of the parasitic bird have evolved to resemble the host's egg in size and color to reduce the chances of the host bird detecting the foreign eggs and ejecting them from the nest. Try to follow movements of the cuckoo, quail, and the crow in your summer neighborhood park during breeding season, spring to summer, and watch brood parasitism in action. Fourth, commensalism. This is the interaction in which one species benefits and the other is neither harmed nor benefited. An orchid growing as an epiphyte on a mango branch and barnacles growing on the back of a whale benefit neither the mango tree nor the whale derives any apparent benefit. The cattle egret and the grazing cattle in close association, a sight you are most likely to catch if you live in a farmed rural areas, is a classic example of commensalism. The egrets always forays close to where the cattle are grazing because the cattle, as they move, stir up and flush out insects from the vegetation that otherwise might be difficult for the egrets to find and catch. Another example of commensalism is the interaction between sea anemone that has stinging tentacles and the clownfish that lives among them. The fish gets protection from predators which stay away from the stinging tentacles. The anemone does not appear to derive any benefit by hosting the clownfish. Fifth is mutualism. This interaction confers benefits on both the interacting species. Lichens represent an intimate mutualistic relationship between a fungus, photosynthesizing algae, or cyanobacteria. Similarly, the mycorrhizae are associations between fungi and roots of higher plants. The fungi help the plant in absorption of essential nutrients from the soil, while the plant in turn provides the fungi with energy-yielding carbohydrates. The most spectacular evolutionary fascinating examples of mutualism are found in plant-animal relationships. Plants need the help of animals for pollinating their flowers and dispersing their seeds. Animals obviously have to be paid fees for the service that plants expect from them. So plants offer rewards or fees in the form of pollen and nectar for pollinators and juicy and nutritious fruits for seed dispersers. But the mutually beneficial system should also be safeguarded against cheaters, for example animals that try to steal nectar without aiding in pollination. Now you can see why plant animal interactions are often involve co-evolution of the mutualists. That is, evolution of the flower and its pollinator species are tightly linked with one another. In many species of fig trees, there is a tight one-to-one relationship with the pollinator species of wasp. It means that A given fig species can be pollinated only by its partner wasp species and no other species. The female wasp uses the fruit not only as an oviposition, leg-laying site, but also uses the developing seeds within the fruit for nourishing its larvae. The wasp pollinates the fig inflorescence while searching for the suitable egg-laying sites. In return for the favor of pollination, the fig offers the wasp some of its developing seeds as food for developing wasp larvae. Orchids show a bewildering diversity of floral patterns, many of which have evolved to attract right pollinator insects, bees, and bumblebees, and ensure guaranteed pollination by it. Not all orchids offer rewards. The Mediterranean Mediterranean orchids of a rice employs sexual deceit to get pollination done by a species of bee. One petal of its flower bears an uncanny resemblance to the female of the bee in size, color, and markings. The male bee is attracted to what it perceives as a female, pseudo-copulates with the flower, and during that process it is dusted with pollen from the flower. When this bee pseudo-copulates with another flower, it transfers pollen grain to it and thus pollinates the flower. Here you can see how co-evolution operates. If the female bee's color pattern changed slightly even for any reason during evolution, pollination success will be reduced unless the orchid flower co-evolves to maintain the resemblance of its petal to the female bee. Summary of the chapter: as a branch of biology, ecology is the study of relationship of living organisms with abiotic physiochemical factors and biotic components or the species of the environment. It is concerned with four levels of biological organizations: organisms, populations, communities, and biomes. Evolutionary changes through natural selection take place at population level, and hence population ecology is an important area of ecology. A population is a group of individuals of a given species sharing or competing for similar resources in a defined geographical area. Population have attributes that individual organisms do not: birth rates and death rates, sex ratio, and age distribution. The proportion of age groups of males and females in the population is often presented graphically as age pyramid. Its shape indicates whether a population is stationary, growing, or declining. Ecological effects of any factors on a population are generally reflected in its size, population density, which may be expressed in different ways: numbers, biomass, percentage cover, etc., depending on the species. Populations grow in births and immigration and decline through deaths and immigration. When resources are unlimited, the growth is usually exponential, but when the resources become progressively limiting, the growth pattern turns logistic. In either case, growth is ultimately limited by the carrying capacity of an environment. The intrinsic rate of natural increase, R, is a measure of the inherent potential of a population to grow. In nature, population of different species in a habitat do not live in isolation but interact in many ways. Depending on the outcome, these interactions between two species are classified as competition. Both species suffer; predation and parasitism, one benefits and other suffers; commensalism, one benefits and other is unaffected; amensalism, one is harmed and other is unaffected; and mutualism, both species benefit. Predation is a very important process through which trophic energy transfer is facilitated, and some predators help in controlling their prey populations. Plants have evolved diverse morphological and chemical defenses against herbivory. In competition, it is presumed that superior competitor eliminates the inferior one, the competitive exclusion principle, but many closely related species have evolved various mechanisms which facilitate their coexistence. Some of the most fascinating cases of mutualism in nature are seen in plant-pollinator interactions. And with this, we come to the end of the chapter, Organisms and Populations. In this chapter, we understood how organisms interact with their environment, how populations grow, and how factors like climate, resources, and adaptations affect the survival. Thank you for listening to this podcast on StudySavvy, and I hope this reading helped you to revise the concepts clearly and calmly. Until the next chapter, keep learning. Thank you.